The Benjamin Dixon Show is only possible with listener support. Go to www.thebenjamindixonshow.com to register for our blog and join the Progressive Army.
Welcome to the Benjamin Dixon Show. I am your host, Benjamin Dixon. Today is Monday, May the 4th, 2020. Thanks so much for joining me. I am ecstatic about the interview today. I had a chance to speak with Professor Jared Ball. He is a professor of communications at Morgan State University in Baltimore, Maryland. He is an author. He is a radio host and a mixtape radio producer, and just all around dope brother. And we had a chance to talk extensively about his book that is out. It is called The Myth and Propaganda of Black Buying Power. And as you will hear in this interview, this book, I think, is critical to the conversation about liberation. It's critical to the conversation about income inequality and the evils of capitalism, specifically as we see it unveiling before our eyes in COVID-19. Those of us who pay attention are not surprised by the way the ruling elite of this country are trying desperately to get us back out to purchase, to work, as well as to consume, mainly to consume. In this conversation, Professor Ball dropped gems all the way through it. As always, if you want the uncut, unedited version, from beginning to end without any of the interruptions, you can become a patron at patreon.com/BPD show, because I am still living in a capitalist society. So, and we actually discussed that in this interview. We discussed the responsibility that we have, even as participants, people who are born into a system that we don't control, the responsibility that we have to challenge that system. And you can get the full uncut version of it. There is irony here, but I do think it's well worth as little as $3 a month. So let's jump right into the conversation. And I know. Well, let me just shut up. Why don't you find out for yourself how dope this conversation was? Let's jump right into it. Thank you so much for your time this morning. Thank you for coming on the show and discussing your forthcoming book, The Myth and Propaganda of Black Buying Power. Professor, could you just give us a snapshot? I have a list of questions. I had a chance to read it. Thank you for sending it to me, and I had a chance to read as much as I could get in. And it is sincerely dynamic, and I can't stress that enough for my audience. But give us like the elevator pitch of what's in this book.
Well, the elevator pitch would be that anybody who has spent any time in any form of the Black political sphere or public sphere, that is and I mean anywhere on that in the range, would have heard a version of this myth over the last 30, 40, even 50 years, if not longer. Right. And that is simply that we have this, what is now said to be more than $1 trillion that we could better spend if we were more quote unquote financially literate, and could better use our money to close persistent gaps in income and wealth. And for so many years, as an activist, as an educator, as a student, I would hear this everywhere from pulpits, from podia, from classrooms, and I would just and it never came with any substantive citations or research. It just kept being used, and it never comported with the research I was doing in terms of the actual economic condition. Yeah. So when I just started looking into it, I realized that the myth is not real. It is a marketing and advertising concoction meant to bring white advertising dollars to Black-owned media. Commercial media, and that is at least where the myth is and how it emerged in its most current form. Though it has, as I talk a little bit about in the book, some an antecedent history that has a bit of a different meaning. But how it's been deployed and evolved, and particular to the Black community over really the last 50, 60 years. Is something very different, and as I argue, pernicious and dangerously inhibiting to our, our analysis and interpretation, and ultimately the programs we develop to address these concerns.
So, and that's the core of what struck me. Like as soon as I read the title, of the book, I was like, absolutely, coming. We got to get you on the show. Because the title itself really speaks to what has happened in the Black community. I do like the way that you unpacked the evolution of this concept. We use it as a statement of fact when it is actually a statement that has evolved from propaganda used to, in my opinion, from my reading, I gather that it is used to maximize our consumption from the Black community. And it's looked at as almost like predatory in a sense of like businesses salivating over the fact that there's that much money to be gotten from the Black community versus the way it's sold to us, which is this is a testament of our economic power if we just did better with our money.
Well, there is a broader political context that I try to outline a little bit in the book that has to do with national security concerns, the ongoing struggles and need to suppress a potential Black uprising and to limit Black political struggle. But specifically, the concept of buying power originates really in the 19th century, and it evolves coming out of the Bureau of Labor Statistics as an effort among the elite in the political world and the economic world to manage the increasing tensions between capital and labor after the Civil War and so-called Reconstruction, et cetera, where white laborers primarily were saying, wait a minute, we've been watching all this increase in industrialization. We've been involved with producing so much in terms of what the commercial world needs, but we're not being paid enough to actually buy those things.
Right.
So the powerful essentially got together to say, look, we need to have some conversation to figure out how do we suppress wages enough so that the owners can make as much money as they can, but pay workers enough so that they don't raise enough questions about why they can't participate and enjoy themselves a little bit, and ultimately to buy the products that need to be consumed to keep the economy going.
Right.
In the 50s, it gets turned into something where an emerging post-Second World War Black commercial media class led by John H. Johnson was saying, well, we who now own some media and realize the advertising relationship between media, commercial media, and the corporate world, we need to be producing a concept of ourselves that will attract that revenue. So what was essentially done was the myth was created really.
Oh, okay.
In between a Black commercial press and a white corporate America that was saying, on the one hand, we don't want Black people to rebel, and we want them to feel like they can participate in a post-World War II economy, in a democratic, the U.S. is the leading hegemon in the world.
Yeah.
But we don't actually want them to be free and equal, and we can't actually redistribute wealth in such a way that takes it away from those in power and the elite. So they essentially concocted an empty formula to say Black people earn this much money and therefore have this much money that they can spend. So white corporations should feel comfortable advertising with Black commercial media, which would make a Black commercial press elite some money, but would not actually help Black people understand their economic condition and would not actually develop or lead to planning that would change that economic condition itself. So that's where I'm saying the myth is really and as you know, buying power as a concept is applied to anybody, to all groups, to all segments of society, to states, to municipalities, to individual groups. But only in the context of Black America does it become this powerful myth that is used to encourage a Black capitalist endeavor, to blunt Black radical political movements, and really to this day, I think, to confuse where we are in the economy and what we can do about that relationship.
This is fascinating because I think that subtle nuance, I missed that subtle nuance that it actually stemmed from Black media saying, hey, look at how much power is over here. And then it became something that we kind of got inculcated with in terms of this is the path towards Black liberation is our economic power. But it actually, and I think you pointed out in the book that it's tied to, it's that number itself is fallacious, or it's not telling the whole story, because it's really just tied to our income, not any sense of wealth, one, but then two, to get to that number, it really requires that we spend that we completely consume everything that we bring in, which will leave us continuously in this poverty. Am I getting that right?
So at least somewhat, yeah. I mean, it's certainly very close. I mean, essentially, the number, what is now said to be 1.3 or $5 trillion. And I go through this in the book. I mean, I go through some of the reporting, I go through some of the initial studies where these claims come from, the Selig Center, the Nielsen Group, the Black Commercial Press, unfortunately, has a lot to do with this. But there's no substance to the numbers. So as you pointed out, I mean, first of all, the reason propaganda is in the title of the book is because I don't come at this as an economist. I am a media scholar by profession,
right,
an Africana scholar by also by profession, but also by interest. And I'm a student of I'm a consumer of media, right, and I'm an activist. So I'm a consumer of what people in the activist spaces say. So it was the propaganda of this that became most fascinating, because the numbers are really, honestly, they're very easy to dispel once you look at the studies. If you just, so Black people don't even earn more than $800 billion a year. So how could we be spending 1.3 trillion? And then how could that equate to power? Right. So that's another thing I talk a little bit about in the book. Misunderstand what the word power means here. Power does not mean what we conventionally might think of it in terms of economic strength. It does not mean, that we have wealth that we can marshal and invest and generate more wealth for and redistribute to our communities and blah, blah, blah. No, that's not what it means. Power, in the phrase buying power, simply means the ability to consume other people's products that are advertised to you and available to you.
Right.
So the strength is in our ability to transmit whatever we have left in our income to other non-Black owned primarily entities. And that's where it becomes an advertising phrase and propaganda that we, again, across the political spectrum have misunderstood, I think, for a very long time.
Professor, let's pause right here for what we do every day, which is the Patron Party. I've got to thank our supporters.
Go to www.patreon.com/The BPD Show and support the Benjamin Dixon Show.
Very special welcome and thank you to every single one of our newest patrons without whom this show is not possible. Welcome aboard to Charles Metcalf, D. Johnson, Caitlin Kahn, Christopher, Siegfried, I can't pronounce your name, but Siegfried, thank you so much for becoming a patron. Jonas Echo, thank you for becoming a patron. Jimmy Farrow, Aaron Westaway, Shayna Alderman, Brian Wilson, Jeree Thomas, Jared Wilson, Jawanza Williams, Rafi, Jonathan Cooper, and last but not least, Michael E. Goddard. Thank you all for no, there's more. Jeffrey Williams and Adara Blake. Thank you all for becoming patrons. Let's bob. You too can become a part of this prestigious and prodigious patron family by going to patreon.com/The BPD Show, where you get twice the content, unedited, unfiltered, and none of the advertisements like you're going to hear right here.
Welcome back to the Benjamin Dixon Show. Visit us online at www.thebenjamindixonshow.com.
Professor, let's go to the way this has been in the Black community, the Black radical, quote unquote, radical community has taken this, and you address this in the book in terms of, and you actually mentioned it at the top of this interview, it becomes almost a slogan, a banner, speaking of, looking down on the buying habits or the spending habits or the financial habits of Black people by so-called woke Black people who then say, if we just spend our money here, then we could do X, Y, and Z. Unpack that paradigm for us.
So again, this is something that has a thread that goes back, more than a century in Black political discussion. And it goes back to an old concept where, on the one hand, Black people were realizing, obviously, we're in a difficult situation here. But on the other hand, there seemed to be an appearance of money flowing through the community that could be marshaled and used differently. So whether it was a Black business class of the 19th century, whether it was a Booker T. Washington, this is where Booker T. Washington, Du Bois, and Garvey all agree. in variation. They all end up agreeing that there is this buying power that can be used in various ways. Now they didn't have the exact same model. Not everybody has the same plan, and they have different. So a black business class emerges and says to themselves, "We can capture this money. We can get rich, and if we can convince black people to buy with us,
right?"
Then there's an activist group from even Booker T. Washington to Du Bois to Garvey that say we can use this money in our communities and then redistribute it so that we can develop an economic and political power that can then change our situation. And then it gets transferred through and projected, as I say, starting in the 50s through new media technology and an enhanced propaganda system throughout the commercial presses, black and white, so that it becomes an echo chamber wherever people go, people could pick up on this phrase. So you had people in CORE saying it, people in NAACP saying it, people in Nation of Islam saying it, all with a variety of different reasons. And I'll tell you, for your audience, I don't mind giving this sort of what I think is a great reveal for me, is that the only luminary I've been able to find to perfectly understand what the concept meant and how it meant to function in our political and economics world was George Jackson, who in 1971 was clear that buying power was just meant to make people think that capitalism had a potential for black people. And it was meant with a rise in inflation, meaning that the dollar never had an increase in value, and it was all a myth. But the reality is, because there was, Malcolm X picked up a version of this. Minister Farrakhan to this day has a version of it. Claude Anderson has a version of it. Amos Wilson famously had a version of it. And this is how it gets permeated throughout our entire, so from the right to the left to the radical to the conservative, the black political sphere has been saturated with versions of this that have been encouraged primarily because our presses. And then this is a point that my brother at Johns Hopkins, Dr. Nathan Connolly, brought up to me that I think is really perfect here. That there is that we're often where people like me are criticized as having a pessimism as it relates to the economy. As Dr. Connolly points out, it's really that we have been encouraged to have a pessimism about our engagement in the political sphere. Right. So we're to the point where we are encouraged only to focus on getting our money up to then match. Then we can enter the political world. But this is what the rich have been using as a manipulation for a long time, because the wealthy know that there is no separation between political and economic realities. If to make money, you have to have a political backing and a public policy backing to generate that and protect the accumulation of that wealth for yourself. So this has all been part of what has led to so much confusion, and why I think it's taken me so long to try to finally align it and lay it out. And it's going to be a very difficult myth, I think, to break, bubble to burst.
Right. It's almost like, from what I'm hearing you say, it's almost like we took the poison and thought it was the cure. Like we took this idea of and actually in the book you quote Dr. King. Let me read this passage, and then I want you to give us your thoughts on your own thoughts. You said Dr. Martin Luther King, at the end of his life, a point at which several have noted his advanced political radicalism, acknowledged that the value of supporting black business ultimately challenged the myth of buying power. And then you quote him directly, and this is what Dr. King said: "Just as a Negro cannot achieve political power in isolation, neither can he gain economic power through separatism. While there must be a continued emphasis on the need for blacks to pool their economic resources and withdraw consumer support from discriminating firms, we must not be oblivious to the fact that the larger economic problems confronting the Negro community will only be solved by federal programs involving billions of dollars. One unfortunate thing about black power is that if it gives priority to race precisely at a time when the impact of automation and other forces have made the economic question fundamental for blacks and whites alike. In this context, a slogan, 'Power for Poor People,' would be much more appropriate than the slogan Black Power." I want to read this last part and then get your thoughts. "In short, the Negro's problem cannot be solved unless the whole of American society takes a turn towards greater economic justice." Your thoughts on your thoughts.
no. So on the one hand, I just have to quickly point out that one of the greatest myths imposed on us is the version of Dr. King that many of us are stuck with. That when he was so much more radical and threatening to the state, to the economic elite, and we would do well to spend more time visiting the actual Dr. King as opposed to the one that's been imposed on us
Absolutely.
through mythology. The other part is that the other part, quickly, I would say, is that I would love to have more of a discussion about his accuracy, or I would argue is maybe his limited understanding at the time of Black Power, or the version of Black Power he was dealing with. But specific to this issue, he was absolutely correct. And he understood, I've often been criticized when making this argument about buying power that I'm being, again, too pessimistic, and that I'm not saying that we have enough agency or control or any whatever. Or that we shouldn't support each other. And that's not what I'm saying. But what I am saying is much of what I'm trying to echo from Dr. King here, in that we should support our businesses and support one another and share our wealth and share our money and do all the things that we can do to help one another. But the reality is, if we really want to change the economic condition of the whole, of the community, to get rid of poverty and get rid of inequality and exploitation, then we do have to have a massive redistribution of the wealth that we're all creating. Mm-hmm. So this is where, and we're experiencing this right now in this COVID crisis.
Yes.
That when the consumer is not allowed to participate in the economy slows and shuts down, and then even the elite start to become terrified.
Yeah.
And this is what King was ultimately trying to say. And that's why, I was jokingly the other day, but I think we maybe need to make it real, develop the hashtag respect my consumption. Because it's what King was saying is that at least as I interpret it, is we have to shop and we have to spend money. We have to, we cannot just save, and we cannot just expect to be economically segregated and to be able to develop and to expand our economy. Right. We have to be able to participate in the wealth and share in the wealth that we're all creating. And that's why ultimately I target the GDP of the country as opposed to buying power, is something I think politically we need to be talking about. Right.
So you're all in there's a underlying kind of subtext to the entire conversation, and I may have missed it. You may have explicitly said it in the book. But the economic redistribution, the redistribution of wealth from the top, Dr. King did speak about it. It became anathema in the Black community in a lot of ways, and it's hard to speak of the Black community. You can't speak of it as a monolith, but in the leadership class, or the misleadership class, asking for anything from the government became taboo. Most recently, you would see Jim Clyburn from South Carolina talking about asking the government for something is a bad thing, to paraphrase him poorly, in terms of putting a wedge between the Black community and what someone like Bernie Sanders was advocating for. But I'm hearing through this conversation and what I read in the book that really we have to fundamentally change our perspective as a Black community towards capitalism. And Black capitalism in particular. There's, the latest iteration of this thought, I think, is the slogan, Black capitalism won't save us. Discuss that in context of of your book.
So, I honestly, I try to suppress my own politics as much as possible in this book, because I've over the years found it to be a real struggle to get to the real function of the myth when clouded in people's politics. But the reality really is, whatever ism people want to put on it, we do need to redistribute the wealth that we're all creating. We all are creating more than a $20 trillion gross domestic product in this country every year, before this crisis, unfortunately, at least. And the real question for me is, how is that redistributed or distributed, and how can we redistribute it so that nobody is raising questions about who has enough and whatever? That is plenty of money for everybody in this country and then some.
Right.
So we shouldn't be forced into these conversations in the first place. And if anything, you mentioned him, what Bernie Sanders was advocating to me wasn't far enough. It was too little. It was too soft. And this is really how the myth ends up functioning. Over the years, we have been encouraged from a political elite, an economic elite, to separate ourselves from from politics or the recognition or the role politics plays in economics. And meanwhile, the elite understand this fully well. And this is why the elite today, look, it's the wealthiest in the country that are going to Congress and the Senate now saying, give us more money.
Right.
They're the ones, they spend the billions every year lobbying everybody so that they can literally write the legislation, the public policy that we all suffer. So they are very clear that government is essential. When the right wing and the elite say we want less government, what they're really saying is we want less government working for other people. Yeah. We want more government working for us. All of them get so much money, get so much filtered through to their private accounts through our public creation of the wealth and through the distribution through taxes and tax breaks, et cetera. And we need to be more focused on that. And what I try to outline a little bit in the book is the history of the encouragement that we walk away from this,
right?
And as part of the promotion of a black capitalism, and as a subsidiary, this myth of black buying power. Because part of the myth is that black people are poor because we're just financially illiterate and irresponsible,
right?
And that attendant to that is that if you are responsible, this economy is great and will work wonderfully for you, and you can do well. And that's just not how things go. And one thing I just want to point out very quickly is that I described this in the book, an exchange I had with a president of an industrial bank here in Washington, D.C., who I think exposed more than any other exchange I've had personally, how those who literally are the ones managing all of this either are complicit consciously or themselves, which I suspect is the case, don't really even understand what it is that they're doing or how the economy functions. And this is one of the reasons why so few of us actually understand it, because those who are supposed to, at least by name, understand it best, seem not to at all, or seem not able to communicate that reality or understanding to us if they do.
We'll make it up, you put us together. We'll make it up, you put us together. We'll make it up, you put us together.
There's so much more of this interview that you can get access to by going to patreon.com/the BPD show and becoming a patron for as little as $3 a month. But before I go, I want you to hear from the professor in terms of how to get up with him, as well as his book, how to get the book. And I want everyone who's a listener that I want you to go get that book.
Try to rise to the challenge, because I'll conclude here, we cannot get to better levels of analysis and strategy if we can't get rid of at least this component of the mythologies that are thrown against it.
My brother, Jared Ball, he is professor of communication studies at Morgan State University and HBCU, that I'm proud to say Bethune-Cookman, my school, I believe we beat up on you guys quite a few times in the past, but much love and respect, because there's some amazing scholarship that's coming out of that school through you, brother. Thank you so much for your time.
Man, thank you for the opportunity, and I appreciate the work that you're doing, and peace to you and your audience, man. Thank you very much.
And I'm sorry, I did this out of order. Tell everyone how to get up with you and when the book is coming out.
Oh, yeah, I did a horrible job of self-promotion. First of all, the book is out already. It came out a little early, so people can get the book right now, an e-version, hard copy, whatever. And the simplest way to do it, and we invite you and your audience to all join us for the virtual book launch party we're having on May 25th. Special guests and music and discussion. It's going to be a lot of fun. That's, again, May 25th. And all of that, the launch party, the book itself, you can get through my website at imixwhatilike.org, imixwhatilike.org, which is a shout out to the I Write What I Like of Steve Biko in a digital media moment. But yeah, when we invite all of you to check it out, and I'd love to have you all join the party, of course, but the discussion, the critique, the debate around the book would all be welcomed as well.
Absolutely. The name of the book is The Myth and Propaganda of Black Buying Power. Professor Jared A. Ball. Thanks so much, brother.
Thank you, my man.
Absolutely love that conversation. There's so much more that's going to happen after the music for patrons. Patrons, stay tuned. If you want to access patreon.com/the BPD show and become a patron today. Absolutely love these conversations. I'll see you next time.
The Benjamin Dixon Show is only possible with listener support. Go to www.patreon.com/the BPD Show and support The Benjamin Dixon Show. If you like this episode, be sure to share, like, and subscribe.